I have to say I had trouble at times discussing this without making my anger manifest. There's oftentimes I speak with a lot of passion about issues that I feel very strongly about. I think in general, I have a lot of experience in ensuring that that passion drives my expression of the views and doesn't overtake it or overwhelm it. And in this case, I felt at times I had to struggle to make sure to keep that in check, because I find what is being done here so enraging, so infuriating. It's actually, if you just take a step back, it's really unimaginable what is happening in the West. I think it's such a cliche, but it's the only one that I can think of that really expresses the idea, which is the boiling frog and the way in which, and I hate this metaphor because as an animal rights advocate, it's a horrific image that I really don't like thinking about, but I will sacrifice that cause for the broader one of expressing this point, which is you put a frog in water and you every 15 minutes or so turn up the heat, and eventually the frog is in boiling water that's fatal to it, but it never jumps out because the increase of the heat was sufficient to make the frog continuously get accustomed to the new level of heat, and it never really was aware that it got to the extreme point that it needed to jump out. I don't even know if that's biologically true or not, but you get the point. If you were to tell someone or to think yourself that we 3 years ago, let's say 3 years ago, would be at a point where a social media company that has as one of its creators, who goes on the site like any other creator and produces content, who gets accused of crimes through the media, not even by the police, is never convicted of anything or let alone even charged yet, and that there is some government official using a newly enacted censorship law who is running around to every media company and social media company she can find, demanding that those companies punish the citizen in ways that the state yet can't do because he's been convicted of nothing. And that of all the companies, only one refuses to comply, and that company then becomes the target of a multi-pronged effort to destroy it, led as usual by the little cretins in the corporate media that call themselves journalists and yet as always are the leading agitators for greater and greater censorship, who step forward to malign the site, to make it toxic to its advertisers, who call up advertisers under the guise of journalism, when in fact what they're trying to do is act as an activist group to scare them away. We just saw with Dave Portnoy when he tape recorded the conversation he had with that Washington Post reporter, who he found out was calling the advertisers for the event by Barstool, and she was pretending to be a reporter. Hi, I'm calling to see how you're navigating the conflict that comes from the fact that you're involved in an event sponsored by somebody who's known to be a misogynist and who has been accused of sexual assault, when in fact, nobody had been thinking about that. That was a controversy completely manufactured by the Washington Post that they then went and reported on with the intention of driving the advertisers of Dave Portnoy away by essentially saying, we're going to publish in our newspaper that everybody reads your name and your business and accuse you of being associated with somebody who's a known misogynist and racist and somebody who has a history of sexual assault accusations. This is how these corporate media outlets and these fake journalists, under the guise of reporting, instead engage in liberal activism all the time. It's how they become the leading censorship activists. They call up Facebook or Google and they say, hey, we notice this far-right extremist on your site who's saying all these terrible things and you're allowing him to say it. And we have experts who say that you're doing so endangers marginalized populations. And if you don't ban him, we're going to write about that. And we're going to call your advertisers and we're going to say, are you comfortable with a platform that allows this person? And the whole point of it is to act as activists to get that person banned, censored from the internet, while doing it under the pretense, the masquerading guise of reporting. And so the fact that the Associated Press steps forward to malign Rumble as this vector of hate speech and right-wing extremism at exactly the time they know that Rumble is now in this fight, this very public fight that they have heroically pursued with the UK government, is exactly what these media outlets do that ought to have been expected. The fact that The Guardian then steps forward, along with a bunch of others, and says, look at these corporate advertisers we got to withdraw their willingness to be associated with Rumble. The advertising revenue on which Rumble depends is just another prong of the activism under the guise of journalism. But by far the worst part is that there's state actors involved here. people who are part of the UK government who are threatening Rumble, not just with banishment. We're going to bar your entire media platform and all the shows that you have and the creators that are on your platform from being heard by our citizens by cutting you off at the IP level if you don't censor as we command you. But we're also going to threaten you with arrest. We're going to treat you as criminals by leaking to the Sun that under this new law you may be subject to being arrested if you try and enter our country, is the kind of despotism and authoritarianism that we would be outraged over if we heard it coming from any country we've been trained not to think about as democracies before. And it's one that should really be provoking our deepest rage. Because what this is about is taking the internet out of our hands and putting it in theirs. From ensuring that it can no longer be a place that the one place left where dissidents can communicate with each other and where you can hear alternative views, but instead convert it into a closed propaganda system where only they get to be heard, but no one who challenges what they say. Because those people are now in a very well-financed industry characterized as being disinformation agents or guilty of hate speech. And that's why this couple in Britain is so illustrative, because she's the one who attacks dissidents while he's the one who disseminates state propaganda. That's the two-tooled, two-armed monster that we're fighting. And really right now the one who's fighting it is Rumble. We have gone over the ways in which the media completely turned on Elon Musk. They revered him for a long time, the person who was going to bring us electric cars and solve the climate crisis and get us to Mars, and was this tycoon of our age, and they turned on him on a dime for the crime of saying he was going to buy Twitter and lower the dial on the kinds of censorship that they've come to expect, the corporate media and governments have the right to expect, or have trained themselves to believe they have the right to expect these media outlets will provide, simply for saying, I'm not going to be providing that any longer, for opening the corporate files to show what these governments have been doing. He not only has been attacked and maligned in every way, the New York Times publishing all kinds of articles saying he's a racist while acknowledging in paragraph 37 that he was an anti-apartheid activist in high school. There's all kinds of formal investigations against him and his company, all of which arose exactly at the time that he stood up and said, I'm going to challenge the censorship regime. But Rumble is much more vulnerable as a site. It's not the richest person in the world that runs it. And it's also challenging the censorship regime at least as aggressively and directly, I would say even at this point more so, by doing things, for instance, like accepting the fact that they're unavailable in France on the principle that they're not going to allow any government to dictate to it who they can and can't platform. And if you share my concern and my alarm and my anger over what's happening here, and I hope that you do, I know from experience that people want the ability to take action, like, well, I don't want to just be angry about this. What can I do to help this? And I talked to Rumble today about developing a plan, because I know there are a lot of people who care deeply about free speech on the internet, who understand that it's not just some abstract concept, but it's crucial to accomplishing anything. If we lose the ability to politically organize and to be heard, and everyone else is subject to the same messaging that we can no longer challenge, every other cause just erodes away. And I know there are a lot of people who understand that, which is why there's so many people fleeing big tech. We're demanding of our politicians confrontations with big tech. The RNC couldn't partner with YouTube or Facebook to broadcast their debate because conservative voters won't accept deals with big tech because they understand what a malicious menace they are. That's why they did a deal with Rumble. There is a growing understanding of how dangerous the censorship regime is. But if we allow Rumble to be destroyed through this campaign, it not only will take away one of the very few places where this free speech can still thrive in a meaningful way, meaning where you can reach a lot of people. We're extremely enthused by the audience size that we reach with our programs, and that I see others reaching who are on here, including Russell Brand. Rumble has built a large and young and vibrant audience. And the good news is there's something like 40 or 50% of Americans who still haven't even heard of Rumble, which means the potential for growth is still so much greater. But if they succeed in destroying it, it will not only take away one of the very few outlets actually fighting this cause in an effective way, it will also set an example that, look, don't try this anymore. Remember, Parler got destroyed overnight. after January 6th by AOC and the Democrats, who demanded that Google and Apple remove them from their store. Those companies obeyed within 24 hours, and then Amazon obeyed within 48 hours and took them off the internet. And they were crippled and never recovered at the very time they became the most popular downloaded app in the world, ahead of Instagram and TikTok and every other app, because they were promising free speech online. That's how much of a demand there is for it. That's how eager they are to destroy it. And if we allow Rumble to be destroyed the way Parler was, it's going to close the ability of other companies or other people willing to devote themselves to this cause, because it's going to seem futile. It's going to seem like the only viable course of action is to obey the censorship regime. And I know Rumble has taken all kinds of steps technologically and in other ways to insulate themselves against it. But if they are allowed to stop, to drive away advertisers, to prevent anybody from wanting to associate with it in a monetary way, obviously Rumble needs financing and capital and money to function, to operate, to promote itself, to pay creators, to attract creators, to thrive and to grow. That's why they're going after it this way. And so the way that you can help is by two things, I think. And I do think there's going to be a specific program that I hope Rumble will unveil that will be done in a coordinated way with all of its biggest creators, with its biggest platforms, in defense of this platform that I do think has become so important for the reasons I just detailed. Obviously, patronizing our advertisers is incredibly important. Even if you don't want or love or need the product, if you go buy the product and advertisers see that there are a lot of people willing to support them and that they're not going to lose by associating with programs on Rumble, but gain, that's an incredibly important incentive scheme. And then ultimately so is supporting the programs that you like financially by joining each site's locals community. The locals community is kind of like Substack. That's where we have subscribers. That's where every show has our subscribers. There's a lot that happens on locals that we can do more there, and we intend to do more there. As you know, now we have our live interactive after show every Tuesday and Thursday night just for subscribers. We publish very detailed and professionalized transcripts of each program for those who don't want to watch or can't watch the whole show. You can read it, which a lot of people prefer to do. Within 24 hours, we have highly professionalized transcripts. I'm going to try and start writing a lot more now that my family crisis is starting to be more resolved and they have more energy and time to do that. But in general, the real reason to do it is to support independent journalism that's under attack in every way the minute it steps out of line. That's the way to stand up and fight back. I know it's kind of simple, but this whole war is about trying to cut off money supplies to sites that are disobedient. That's what they did to WikiLeaks in 2011 that I've gone over before. It's the same thing. The government said to Bank of America and MasterCard and Visa, Joe Lieberman said, we don't think you should be processing payments for this website that is in danger of national security. And even though they never charged WikiLeaks with a crime then, let alone convicted of them, they got these banks to cut off all donations, all accounts for WikiLeaks. They couldn't collect money anymore and obviously couldn't function. And that was when we created the Freedom of the Press Foundation and we raised millions of dollars for WikiLeaks, which was the right response to that despotic effort. So you can support creators on Rumble, your favorite shows here, go join their locals community. You can patronize Rumble's advertisers. I hope we're going to have more because I know when people get angry, they want to direct that anger into constructive steps to take. And I do think those are very constructive steps, the ones I've just outlined. Those matter a lot. And they matter not only because they help those shows, they help the platform, but they send the message as well that you may have a lot of people willing to cheer every time someone who doesn't affirm liberal orthodoxies is silenced and threatened because you've trained them to believe that everybody is dangerous who doesn't affirm neoliberal orthodoxies, but there's a huge number of people at least as big and more engaged who understand how dangerous it is for only that group to be heard and who's willing to engage in efforts and use their own money to support the ability of free and independent media to thrive. So our locals community exists here. It's the join button right below the video player, but go pick whatever program you like on Rumble and support them as well. That is the answer for people to see that happening. Patronize the advertisers who are still advertising on Rumble despite these threats, despite this climate being generated, because this censorship regime, you cannot overstate the dangers of it. It's the reason I've spent so much time over the last 2 years reporting on it and documenting it and denouncing it and working against it. It's why I moved from Substack, which is working very well, and what also was devoted to free speech, to Rumble, because I knew and I saw the potential that Rumble had to become this gigantic site that reaches millions of people while defending these free speech rights. There are a lot of people on Rumble who have shows here who can't have shows anywhere else. And I consider that incomparably valuable and incomparably important, because it's basically a gigantic middle finger stuck up at the people who are trying to destroy our most basic freedoms, to degrade the internet into something it was never intended to be. An incredibly effective propaganda machine that is utterly free of dissent. And if we allow that to happen, once that takes hold, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to reverse it. The time to fight it is now. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.